Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Chicago. Hi, I'm Lauren Leader. I'm the co-founder and CEO of All In Together, and I'm extremely excited to be here after a 14-hour travel odyssey from New York City, which almost put me in a car driving cross country, but definitely not. I would have done anything to not do that, but we made it. We all are best friends from this flight now. But somebody said on the flight, they said, Kamala said we're not going back. We were not going to go back to LaGuardia, just to be clear. Although we did twice. Anyway, we're so thrilled to have you here for All In Together's first event of the Democratic National Convention. All In Together is a nonpartisan women's civic education organization. We are now 10 years old. This is our 10th anniversary this year. And we have been running training programs across America for the last decade, training women on core civics, on political participation, on how to really have a voice and be engaged in your community, how to speak up and stand up. We are nonpartisan. We also did this same or very similar training in Milwaukee during the RNC, which was really fascinating. And we have been very excited about being here today. We have a long-standing partnership with Microsoft, which has been absolutely incredible. And as you will hear from my colleague, Ginny Badanes, who runs Democracy Forward at Microsoft, Microsoft is doing incredible work to protect the integrity of elections, not just here, but around the world, from potential AI and other artificially generated interference in our elections. And just this morning, I don't want to steal her thunder, but some of you may have seen that even just in the last 24 hours, there is a new AI generated image of Taylor Swift endorsing a certain candidate that she did not, in fact, endorse. So our view about why this matters so much is, and Ginny will talk about this, is that in particular, AI-generated attacks, AI-generated political attacks have disproportionately targeted women and especially women of color. And we are an organization that is committed to making sure that women's voices are fully heard and that they are able to fully participate in our democracy. And so as we started to understand the impact of AI on our democratic process, we feel incredibly lucky to have this partnership with Microsoft. We are also just, and you will start receiving it from us, we are now putting out weekly reports from now until the election that tracks racial and gender-based attacks on women in the public domain. And that obviously includes Vice President Harris, and we have seen about a 50-fold increase in the online attacks on her since a year ago, but not just her, because our view is that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. We also just put out a report, or it'll be today actually, about the attacks on Usha Vance, the racist and sexist attacks on her. And it doesn't matter your party, it's unacceptable, and we should all be working hard to call it out. So I hope you'll follow our work. My last item of business before I invite Ginny up is you were all given a discount code, I think last night, to also join us tomorrow. We will be here with an absolutely spectacular lineup, 3 women governors, 2 lieutenant governors, including one who, depending on November, may be the next governor of the great state of Minnesota. That's Peggy Flanagan. Also the lieutenant governor from the state of Illinois, Juliana Stratton, Jocelyn Benson from the Secretary of State from Michigan, and then Governors Hochul, Kelly, and Lujan Grisham. And then we have this amazing influencer conversation at the end with Sophia Bush and Vetus, who you may know does the Under the Desk Politics TikTok, if you follow her. So anyway, you're all welcome to come. It is a paid event, but you have received a discount to join us tomorrow if you would like to. So please let us know if you want to join. We'd love to see you tomorrow. And this is your time. We will have mics. You can ask questions. This is meant to be casual. Make friends with your neighbors. Make friends with us. And we're really grateful you're here. So without further ado, I want to introduce Ginny Badanes, who, as I said, you will start to see her in lots of places. She runs this incredible program called Democracy Forward, which focuses on election integrity around the world on behalf of Microsoft. And she is a great board member of ours and a great friend. So Ginny, over to you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for being here. First day in Chicago, and I'm sure it's gonna be a great week, and I appreciate you being here to start it with us, though many of you have probably already been to like 3 breakfasts and whatnot already at this point. So here's what we wanna talk about. We'll get into some of the details, but let's really quickly sort of level set on what it is we're talking about when we talk about AI elections. What are we looking at? So first of all, when you talk about AI and elections, there are actually some opportunities. So it could be that AI is used to help political campaigns. It could be used to help those who are doing grassroots activities to get better reach, to speak languages more appropriately to their constituents or to people they're trying to reach. There are a lot of amazing opportunities when it comes to generative AI. And I have some colleagues who spend their lives right now really thinking about that and spending a lot of time and effort trying to unlock potential and make sure that people can get the most out of this technology. That's really important. However, as a responsible technology company, we should not only be looking at all of the advantages and opportunities, we should also be thinking about the risks. And we do that a lot as well. Our team has been thinking a lot over the last couple of years about how will adversaries try and use this technology to undermine elections, right? And what is that gonna look like? How are they gonna use it to attack political campaigns? How will it be used to attack trust in the process, in the media? These are all really big risks and areas where technology industry, as we put this technology into this space, also have an obligation to lean into those risks and put forward some solutions. So just wanted to level set that we recognize that this is a little bit of a tools and a weapons kind of conversation, that there are pros and cons. Today, we will be focusing more on how do we, as a community, protect ourselves on sort of the more negative risk side of the equation. Okay, so here's the agenda. I also want to introduce my colleague Lizzie, who you'll be hearing from a lot today. She's part of the Microsoft Democracy Forward team as well, based in Seattle. I'm based in Washington, D.C. So we're going to talk about the threats that can be faced here. We're going to talk about the opportunities, as I mentioned. We're going to look at how deepfakes are actually created. So we'll get a little wonky here, and that's fine if you don't understand everything. As Lauren mentioned, this is intended to be a conversation. We want to hear from you. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions, but we will talk a little bit about the history of the technology and the way that it's being leveraged. And we'll also talk about sort of the ways that people are being transparent and how we're creating a more resilient society in order to be more prepared for this. But first, so in a moment, we're going to take a quiz as a group, right, about whether you can identify real images or fake. But we have our friend Trevor Noah, who's gonna take the quiz first, so you get a sense of what this is gonna look like before you take it yourself.
Hey everybody, Trevor Noah here, and I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington, where today I'm gonna be having a conversation with Oren Etzioni. He is the founder of TrueMedia.org. Now, you may or may not know this, but in the United States, over half of the adult population currently gets their news from social media. And so Oren and his team are working on using AI to develop tools that'll better help people to understand when they are or aren't looking at a deepfake. Because really, the big question that's on everyone's minds is, how can we use this technology to better prevent elections from losing their legitimacy? You can't find answers without asking the right questions. This is The Prompt with me, Trevor Noah.
Trevor, good to see you. Please come in, have a seat.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you. How are you?
I'm good, but I have to say, I am worried. It's 2024. People are going to the polls all over the world, but especially in November, and we've got a problem.
I mean, where do you start when you're looking at this? Like, what are the tools you're using, and how do you even begin to think about how you aim your team and your technology?
The first place to start is for people to understand that they cannot figure this out on their own. It used to be that these fakes would have like 6 fingers. If you just squint at them, you could tell. No longer the case. If I may.
Yeah, of course.
So what I'm about to show you here is a quiz created by Microsoft. It shows you an image, and you have to decide real or artificial. Not to put you on the spot.
Oh, here we go.
We know that most people have a very hard time with this. Maybe take a couple rounds.
All right. I'm going to say that's artificial.
Good job.
Okay. Oh, this is an interesting one. Oh, this man is very stylish. The sign looks good. The shadow's in the right place. Maybe not. Oh, it's so fake. That was real. Look at this. I don't know the world anymore.
Your score at this point
is 1. My score is 1?
Out of 6, yeah.
This is fascinating.
But it's so tricky. That's the thing. This is not about you as much as everybody is.
That's not real?
It looks real.
This is wild. Wow.
Here's our website, truemedia.org. We identify political deepfakes, particularly focused on social media. And you can upload a file, like a video or an image, or you can type in a URL of something that appeared on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, what have you. But the point is, this is just a tool when you're not sure, which hopefully you're not anymore.
I'm definitely not sure anymore. I don't even know if some of the photos in my own album are real now. but help me. Okay, let's talk through some of these details. So, substantial evidence of manipulation. It's interesting that you don't just say real or fake. What does that mean?
You keyed onto a really important fact. We're using good AI to fight bad AI, that's for sure. The good news for us is that the problem of detection, which is what we're doing, we're trying to catch the fake ones, is easier than the problem of generation. We are very proud to be getting over 90% accuracy. However, that means that 10% of the time we are wrong.
So when you're looking at a post, half of the time people want to believe what they've seen or heard or watched. What are some of the obstacles you find you're facing in getting people to even want to use the tool?
Everybody's subject to confirmation bias. All we can do is offer people a technical tool that they may choose to use. Education and media literacy, people asking themselves, wait a minute, am I sure this is from a bona fide source, or is it just something that appears across my screen on the internet? It's all about getting people to avoid that reflex action. Oh my God, let me forward it to all my friends.
Yeah, so it's no longer believe what you see, it's believe what you put through truemedia.org.
It's believe what's been verified, either truemedia.org or through knowing exactly what the source is. But yeah, you can no longer believe what you see, unfortunately.
You're in for a ride. 2024 is going to be one of the most consequential elections. Are you excited at this moment in time, or do you approach it with like a certain level of trepidation?
Frankly, I'm terrified. And the reason that I'm terrified is despite our best efforts, the potential is there. What we do know is that every single election that we had this year has had a plethora of deepfakes. The election in Indonesia, in India, in Pakistan, this has just become part of the backdrop to an election process. What is somebody going to drop, and are we ready for it? I just want to do everything I can so that we're ready and do our best.
Oh, you know, as they say with most things, awareness is half of the battle. So thank you very much, all right?
Thank you, really appreciate it.
I need to do that test again. I'm going to ace it this time. I figured it out now. I figured out what it was.
Trevor Noah is also Microsoft's Chief Question Officer. And so he asks a lot of really tough questions and does great interviews through this series we have called The Prompt. And the one that is dedicated today is on this very topic. So let's take the quiz together. I know for some of you in the back, this may be hard to see. On your tables, there's a little QR code. So if you want to take this on your phone later, you can. You could do it now. You're just going to get served different images than the ones we're looking at together as a group. So let's look at this image. Raise your hand if you think that this image is real. Okay, so we got some, but it looks like the majority think it's artificial. Let's see what we find out. Good job. You figured it out. All right, the next one. How about this? Raise your hand if you think that this one is real. Just a couple hands. All right, let's go with artificial. All right. You guys are all doing better than Trevor Noah. All right. How about this one? Let's flip it a little bit. Raise your hand if you think this is artificial. If you think this one is AI generated. Ooh, this one's tough. It's almost half and half. I'm going to say let's click on real. Okay. So some of you were right, some of you were wrong. That was a tough one. We'll do a couple more just to get a sense. Raise your hand if you think this one is artificial. So if this is AI generated. These are not all on the same page. That's about half and half. Let's go with artificial. Okay, so for those of you who thought it was artificial, good job. We'll do this last one right now. If you think that this one is real, raise your hand. Okay, that's a few, but I think most people did not raise their hand, so let's go with artificial. Okay, all right, so you guys did really, really well. I encourage you to take the quiz on your own. And to see if you do as well when you're doing it by yourself with these different images, particularly when you see them more carefully. The reality is it is not that easy anymore to identify real and artificially generated images. We're going to talk a little bit later about sort of why that is. But first, Lizzie here is going to talk a little bit more about what we mean definitionally when we say words like deepfake. It's always good to sort of level set on the language that we're all using. So Lizzie, take it away.
Thanks, Ginny. Hi, everyone. I am Australian by background, so I will try and speak a little slower. My accent can be difficult. Just kind of wave at me if I start using some lingo you don't understand. So what is a deepfake? So as the quiz sort of showed, it's getting really difficult to see the difference between AI or not images. And that's a good thing, because you might want to sort of put yourself in a situation for a marketing campaign where you're saying, this is me on top of the Eiffel Tower. I'm not on top of the Eiffel Tower. No one thinks I am. But you want it to look real. And that's a good thing that AI is getting to this level. What's not a good thing is a deep fake, wherein it's a fraudulent use of AI intended to deceive. So when I'm on the top of the Eiffel Tower, none of you guys think I'm sitting up there. But if I'm using a fraudulent piece of content where you're using sort of my image or someone's image or their voice or in a video, that's what we're thinking about when we're thinking about deep fakes. We're thinking about trying to convince the person, the audience of that content, to believe that this is real and not, in fact, AI generated. So it's often replacing an individual's voice. And so how this sort of works in a step of creating a deepfake is your voice is sort of being recorded as it is, and then it's being manipulated with text to speech, where we're putting in different words, and then your voice is coming out differently. And if it's a video, they're trying to make the video, the original content, match to your video. So as we're sort of seeing from the quiz, as AI is improving, this is looking more and more realistic. And I'll talk a little bit later about the former giveaways that we used to have and why now you really don't know when something is real or when something is fake, and what the tools are for you to be able to combat that situation. So you would have seen these already if you're looking at the news. We're also seeing a lot of this globally, not just in the US, where people's images are being taken and put out of context in AI. Their voices are being manipulated with text they never saw. It's happening both to campaigners, people running for campaign, and you'll see it a lot with celebrities as well. And so one of the key things we're thinking about is, of course, AI in elections and how it's impacting those elected officials. We're also seeing where this can go in other areas, and we're talking a lot about, and my colleague Ginny will speak about this later, fraudulent uses around, for example, financial fraud, and often trying to defraud the elderly or the general public. We're also seeing images of young women and girls being used and deep-faked. And so talking about women specifically, in political women, we're seeing a lot of women in politics being targeted.
That's my fault. Okay. So let's start really quick talking about how deepfakes have been used traditionally. And traditionally is, of course, in the last few years. They did not just emerge in the last 6 months. Not even in the last couple of years. These have been around for a while. They've obviously gotten better. But this has existed for quite a while. 90% plus of deepfakes that are out there in the world right now are of women, and they are pornographic in nature. And so when you really think about the weight of where the harm is, it's harming women, oftentimes young girls, right? Now, when you look at the environment that an elected official or someone who is running for office or in the public eye generally, journalists, for example, what they face online, the doxing, the online harassment, that is disproportionately impacting women, right? When those two things come together, the combination of deepfakes targeting women and online harassment targeting women in the public eye, you can see why it is a concerning trajectory when we think about the way that women who are running for office are going to be impacted by this technology. Now, when you add another layer in of what is the consequence of that, in addition to it just being horrible and an awful experience for those who are involved, it also is a disincentive to be engaged. We already have an issue in the US and globally of women running for office. We do not have enough women in office for sure, and we don't have enough even raising their hand and running for office. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I know there's been a lot of research that's gone into it. There's fundraising concerns. There's women not thinking they're qualified. We need to tackle all of those. But what we need to not do as a society is insert one additional area of concern, which is, am I going to be portrayed online as being nude or in some kind of environment that I was never in a way to embarrass me and keep me from wanting to do this in public, right? So this is a problem for democracy. I'll say one really good thing is that so far we have found that this is a really bipartisan issue. This is something that both Republicans and Democrats alike recognize as an issue. Women on both sides of the aisle are very concerned about this trajectory and this trend. And we've seen public policy being put out in a bipartisan manner to address it. We've recently endorsed, we'll get into some of the things that we're thinking about here, but we've recently endorsed some legislation, including a bipartisan bill that was introduced by Senator Cruz called the Take It Down Act. And that focuses on protecting young women, teenage women in particular, teenage girls, from this kind of behavior. So not to get into all the public policy side of things, but this is just to say that this is a promising area where we are sort of united, it seems like, across the board to address this issue, but the trend is still going in the wrong direction. And voters know it. They're concerned. Now, this is less of a question about gender. It's more a question about how they think AI-generated content is going to impact elections. But in a recent survey done by our partners at Defending Digital Campaigns, together with Yubico, they found 78% of voters are concerned that AI-generated content is going to impact the election. That means voters are paying attention to this issue and they're worried about it. This also leads to a potential problem called sort of the trust deficit, which is if people are so concerned that AI-generated content is going to just be all over the internet and there's nothing you can do about it, then that also leads to a point where people think, well, I can't trust anything I see. And we also don't want to go there, right? We need to be in a place where people can look for and identify authentic and authoritative content. So we'll talk about some of the solutions in that space. So as we started the conversation, I want to lean into the responsibilities that the tech companies have. As a technology company who is introducing and putting AI out into this space, we have some obligations of things that we can and should do. So one of the things that we did on this particular issue is we joined with actually 20 of the leading technology companies in the world. Most of them, you can see it's very small, but you can see the names of the companies up there. It's most of the ones you would expect. We came together in February of this year in Munich and signed a voluntary agreement that did a few things that I think are important. One, it leaned into the fact that this is a problem and that we as technology companies have some responsibility. That maybe sounds like table stakes, but it was important. And it's something I think if you look back in previous election cycles where technology was used in an adversarial way and you didn't really see the technology companies stepping up and saying, we have a role to play here, we have responsibility. So we thought it was important to come out and say collectively, we have a role. The next thing it did is it actually addressed real things we could do as companies to mitigate the harms and the potential of misuse of the technology, whether we're on the creation side. So when I say that, I mean the OpenAIs, the Anthropics, right? The actual model sides, or if we're on the distribution side. So you'll notice we do have TikTok and X, and a lot of the other companies where information is distributed. And then of course, there are those of us like Microsoft and Google and Meta who sit on both sides of the both sides of the equation on this. So there's a lot out there about this. I'm not going to walk you through a boring white paper, but I want you to get a sense of how we're thinking about the problem, particularly because I want you all, when we get to the question section, to push on me, ask me questions. Do you think we're addressing the right issues here from a technology perspective? First, we're looking at the creation, as I just mentioned. What's happening on the model side? How are we thinking about that? Lizzie's going to give you some details about the ways those mitigations are being put in place. Then we're thinking about how do we detect and respond. We'll talk about detection. It's a really tricky issue that a lot of people at first think, oh, detection should be the answer here. And the answer is kind of, but not entirely. And then transparency and resilience, which is essentially what are we doing to be transparent with you all and the public about how we're handling these issues? And then how are we helping build a more resilient environment, whether that's with the consumers or resilient on our own end as well. Okay, so this isn't, I don't know if we have any of the reports here. I'm sure we do. Yes, Lizzie's saying, of course we do. So as Lizzie mentioned, we look at the potential harms from AI-generated content in a sort of an array. Unfortunately, there are lots of potential harms. The elections are very important. Impact on women, very important. But we also note that there are other areas where this can, in fact, already is having a direct impact. One is financial fraud, which Lizzie mentioned, both the consumer end of fraud. So this is the scenario where a grandparent gets a call from their grandchild claiming that they need money immediately and to wire it to them. This is actually happening right now. People don't believe it, but it is. It's happening right now. And so financial fraud for, say, the elderly and vulnerable communities like that, but also at the corporate level. So there are people who are losing money in their companies because they think that they're talking to their CFO or their CEO and they authorize the transfer of money. It wasn't them. It was a deep fake, and they're convincing. The audio files are most convincing, but there have been some cases of people actually having real conversations on like a Zoom or a Teams environment with the person they think they work with, and it's not them. So this is something to be really, really careful about. We already talked about the 3 categories. I went too fast. Okay, Lizzie's going to talk a little bit about the creation side.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historic signs of a deep fake, because I think a lot of people come to these trainings and they hope that we have a silver bullet, like, oh, look for this thing and you'll get it right. And, you know, when you're taking the quiz online, you might say, oh, feel silly that I only got 30%. I work in this area and I am yet to get 100% on that quiz, and I do that quiz way more than I should with my work time. So I think the point is, and I've reiterated this a few times, but there are not the telltale signs that there used to be in the past. So in the past, you can sort of see the list there. You would see, and I'll show you some images in a moment, you would see things like third hands, you'll see the writing, and some of these still exist, and they're still useful to look for. But if you don't see them, the absence of these tells does not mean that the image is not AI generated. So here is sort of a more traditional sort of deep fake that you would have seen. You can actually look at this and you see the writing on the hat isn't clear, isn't English, it's generated. There's a third hand there, and there's also a sort of disjointed finger. So this is the kind of thing that people would still fall for. And, you know, we all look at things quickly, we live busy lives. So these can still be effective if they're generated, but you'll see less and less of these. Here the telltale signs are, you can see on the table, there's a whole bunch of chords mismatched, although as Ginny was saying earlier, we have probably all been in conference rooms where it kind of does look like that, so who knows. But the telltale sign is probably the uniform that you're seeing worn there that we haven't seen in images. But again, these are super helpful to identify, and particularly with video, it's still quite difficult to get the lip syncing correct in quick, easily done deepfakes, but anyone that's spending any time on creating these can get it done very well. So what this means, and I actually started at Microsoft in the cybersecurity part of our company, and sort of we talk there a lot about zero trust or bust, which is basically you assume you're being breached at all times and you build things like that. And so we think about safety architecture like that. We assume that AI tools are going to be tried to be misused, that people are going to manipulate them. And so what we do is we strengthen our architecture in our AI services. And so a lot of red teaming, of course, we're trying to break ourselves all the time, sometimes very successfully, and then we learn from it and iterate. Preemptive classifiers, blocking abusive prompts. You'll see there's some questions that Microsoft's AI just won't answer right now because we say we're not at a point where we can guarantee that it's going to be a safe answer. And so we sort of we say we'd rather direct to search and other locations rather than have something incorrect or false out there. And so this is what we encourage and what a lot of other technology companies are doing. We also rapidly ban users that are abusing this technology. So I think I'm handing to Ginny for detection and response, the hard stuff.
I was gonna say, this is actually like my favorite part, because this is when we start getting into the solution side. So what we've done so far is talk a lot about, you know, sort of the threats out there, the challenges that we've seen. We've talked a little bit about what the technology companies are doing about it. But this is kind of in my mind, it's a really boring, wonky slide, but it's kind of the best slide. Because it's the defense in depth approach that the technology industry, and I'll speak for Microsoft in this case, is taking to create that environment where you can actually trust things online. Because as we mentioned, we do not want to get to a place where we're in a post-truth world where it's proliferating with AI and you can't trust anything. So these are the measures that are in place right now. As I mentioned, you could probably spend like 40 minutes on each of these, so we won't do that to you. But if you have questions about any of these as we go through them, we can happily talk about it in the Q&A, or I'm happy to stay and talk with you afterwards, as are, I'm sure, many of my colleagues. So first, labeling of AI content. So it's important that when people are interacting with a truly created AI image, as let's use the example of Lizzie on top of the Eiffel Tower, While one would look at that and, pretty much assume that wasn't real, having a label on it saying AI generated would be really helpful. That'd be a great clue and indication for the person on the other side of the screen that in fact Lizzie did not stand on the top of the Eiffel Tower. And so we encourage labeling. Now it's kind of hard to say every time AI is used in the creation of an image, it should always have a label. So we're not suggesting that every edit or everything that is ever used has ever been in touch with AI should also have a label. But I think everyone generally understands what we're getting at here. If you're putting an image out there and it's AI generated, you should probably have some kind of indication or label that indicates that. Okay, content credentials. Content credentials are based on actually originally trying to give people the indication that something is authentic. And so it's now also being used to indicate that something was AI generated. These are two different use cases of the same technology. This is an open standard that is created by an organization called C2PA, or the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And while there's a really interesting backstory on how this coalition came together, again, I won't bore you with it, but the idea is that a few different companies, Adobe, Microsoft, and some others, were giving a lot of thought to the challenge of deepfakes years ago. We were really not sure what to do about it because we were having challenges in the detection front. And the question was brought up, well, how do you get to the point where you can say that something is real instead of spending all this time trying to prove what's fake? And so that was the origin behind the idea of content credentials. The way that it's applied now is some companies like Microsoft and again, Adobe and others, when they have things that generate AI images, they will apply C2PA or these standards at the back of that image using something that's called a cryptographic metadata. It's really, I told you we get a little nerdy here. And what that does is that gives an indication to the sites that it's being sent to, or to however you're consuming that media, that this was, in those cases, AI generated. So that's an important tag, and that's something that we're advocating for the adoption of and the use of. And the good news is there are a lot of companies who are now part of this coalition, including Google and others, who are adopting and using this standard. There's also watermarking, which is different. But the thing is that they're actually really helpful to go together, because watermarking is actually more durable. It's harder to take watermarking out of an image, but it doesn't have the transparency that you get from content credentials. And then detection. As I mentioned, people really want to know, why can't you just use AI to find AI? Isn't it that easy? And it can be sometimes. There are classifiers out there. We have them. The gentleman that was speaking with Trevor Noah runs a company called True Media. It's a nonprofit. And what they do is they take classifiers that they've built themselves and ones that companies like Microsoft have given them, and they will run a piece of media through a bunch of different algorithms to identify the likelihood that it's AI generated. This is an important feature. We need a lot of that out there, but it's not, to use the term that everyone uses, it's not a silver bullet, right? That doesn't solve everything. Let me give you an example where detection would be problematic. There's an image of, right after Donald Trump was shot, of him surrounded by Secret Service agents. And in the real image, they're very serious looking because this is a very serious situation. However, an image very quickly started circulating, same picture, but their faces are smiling. That was the only difference. So it wasn't an AI generated image, right? It was an AI edited image. So if you run it through a lot of these classifiers, you're not gonna get like a 100%. It depends on the classifier and what kind of technology was used to create the smile. But the idea is there's nuance, right? There's gray area. It's not black and white. So detection is an important piece of this, but that's why it can't be the silver bullet. And then if you could identify one of these things and just like put all your chips on it, which again, we're not suggesting that, but if you did, I would actually pick literacy. Because what we found is when you have a society that is expecting this, that is looking out for this, that is aware of the fact that images could be AI manipulated or generated, they're going to be a bit more skeptical and therefore more resilient to any kind of fraud, right? And so if we can get to a point where as a society, we have more literacy, more resilience to these issues, then we're gonna be better off overall. A good example of this is in Taiwan. The Taiwanese elections were just a few months ago. There were a lot of deepfakes there. There was a candidate who had dropped out who was purportedly endorsing another candidate, but it didn't work. People weren't really influenced by it. And the common belief, I'm sure there'll be a lot of research, that will actually tell us what happened, but the common belief is it's because the government had actually spent a lot of time teaching the people of Taiwan about this content, telling them that they should expect it, and then giving them somewhere to go to authenticate or look for authoritative information if they ran into something that they didn't know if they should trust or not. That's why I like that slide. It's solutions. If you are running for office, or if you work for someone who runs for office, or if you're working for someone who is running an election, Microsoft has a resource, a link where you can go and report if you or your principal or someone within your organization is being deepfaked. This is a way that you can very quickly take action and let us know. We have a team that will be running these classifiers, that will do a lot of the work behind the scenes to help work with you and identify if in fact it was a deepfake, give you information about what we've identified. And then of course, if it's on one of our platforms and it violates our policies, we'll take appropriate action. But it's important to have more than just one place to go report something. That's not a plan, right? That's a tactic. That's an important tactic. So on your table, first of all, there's lots of great stuff on your tables. There's some notebooks, there's some stickers, there's some reports. There's this thing right here, which is really, really helpful if you are in that category of running for office or have someone who around you is. And it really walks you through an incident response plan. So for those who've been around the cybersecurity world, you know that when you have a campaign these days, didn't always used to be like this, but these days, most campaigns will have an incident response plan for what happens if there's a hack. You should have the same thing for if your candidate is deepfaked. You should know who's responsible, who's gonna go report it to all of the different platforms, who's gonna make the decision and what will the metrics be on whether or not you debunk it publicly. So something to think about is just because there's a deepfake of your candidate and you guys are hyper aware of it, doesn't mean that it's viral or that it's taken off. So you always want to be careful that you don't actually draw more attention to the thing that then is what everyone talks about, right? It's called the Streisand effect. It's like if you draw attention to something that no one's paying attention to, now everyone's paying attention. So don't do that. But what's that, what's the moment where, okay, I feel like this is starting to become viral and that we should take action? That's a conversation for you all to have internally within your organizations. And by the way, this response plan works for any kind of organization. It doesn't have to be a political campaign. You should have a plan though for what are the metrics that we'll look at? What will we consider, a viral moment? What will we consider something a threat? And then what will our plan be to get out in front of it, to our constituents, to social media, et cetera? It's just important to have this conversation at a time when it's not a crisis, so that you're thoughtful about it if and when that happens. Okay, we're almost done. So start thinking of your questions. Lizzie's gonna talk a little bit more about the transparency and resilience side of the work. We'll do a quick wrap up, just kind of top points, and then we can start taking questions from y'all, if you have any.
So Ginny spoke a lot about this, but really the reason we care so much about literacy and societal resilience, besides the fact I used to work in this area, is it's the most scalable solution. And that's not getting tech companies out of having to do all the other solutions, because they absolutely should. But with the same piece that Ginny was speaking about with detection tooling, if people start relying on fact checkers, we see that people don't have trust in systems. So this is prior to deepfakes. We saw a lot of content on social media that was just false. And we found that some people wouldn't believe something at all unless it was fact checked. But not everything can be fact checked because it's not scalable. What is scalable and what is actually much more empowering for people is learning societal resilience and information literacy tools. And these are just, it sort of feels a little bit like those soft skills. They're teaching them a lot at schools right now. We're working with organizations that are working with the elderly on these skills. But it's really that identifying why is information created? Where are other sources I can go to validate this? Am I having an emotional reaction, a strong reaction to what I'm seeing? Is this likely marketing? Is this intended to inform? Is this on a site that I have used regularly? Can I check this? And so again, it's not rocket science, but it actually, these tools, these trust indicators, this method of stop, think, check, and you'll see our stickers and campaign out here, just getting people to pause and really think through what they're seeing and how they can validate it is one of the best ways of combating these sorts of deepfakes. And to Ginny's point, we really have seen globally, Taiwan, also a lot of the European countries have a lot of investment in societal resilience and education. And if people aren't sharing the falsehoods, if they're not if they're seeing it but not realizing why it might be manipulated, you just don't have the negative impacts on first, the actual outcomes of elections, but more importantly, the eroding of trust in institutions and in systems, which happens if people can't believe what they see online. So there's a bunch of information you can see in our content that will take you to information literacy sites. there's a whole range of amazing organizations in the US and globally working on this content, and I'm incredibly passionate about this area, so I'm very happy to talk all day about it. So come find me afterwards if you want to know about kids games or adult materials or anything about this. Content credentials, as Ginny mentioned, is their C2PA standard, and is this critical idea of being able to say, I took this photo, it was me doing this photo here at this time. And so we have any of our team members today, if you want to talk about content credentialing and why we think it's so critical as part of this solution, we're happy to take you through all of that and how it works.
We should mention we have a free tool available to political campaigns. So again, if you're in a political campaign, we have a free tool to let you take all of your original media and put it through the system to mark it as coming from you authentically. Then on certain platforms such as LinkedIn, there are others as well, when you post an image that is taken using this, it'll have a little icon that will give you more information about that picture, such as this was by the Joe Smith for Congress campaign. It was taken on this date by this person. It was edited, perhaps, if there was an edit that was used. There's nothing wrong with editing. We just think that there's an important part of disclosing that when you're putting things out there. So a good scenario to think of where this could have been helpful, and not suggesting they should have been using it, but would it have been in use, for example, at a rally where there were a lot of people in attendance and a picture was taken that was called into question as to whether or not there were actually that many people there? While, of course, there were so many people at that event that it ended up not being all that questionable as to what happened there. But if the image itself that was originally loaded had these standards on it, and when it was put online, people could see the little indication that it was part of the whatever campaign, and it was posted on this date by this staffer, that is a level of authenticity that others could look at, particularly those who are in the fact-checking community or in the journalism community, that would give them reassurance that this was in fact a real picture taken at a real time. So while that example is maybe actually not the best because there were so many people there, you can think of other scenarios in the future where being able to say authoritatively, no, this is a real picture, this person really took it, and I have the receipts and here they are. That's the reason why political campaigns should really be thoughtful about how to use this kind of technology. Again, it's an open standard. Anyone can use it. We made a free tool to make it easier for campaigns, but they're welcome to build their own solutions or work with others too. Did I cut? Oh, that was supposed to be what came next, wasn't it? Sorry, Lizzie. I stole your thunder.
Not at all. And I think this is just the example of why it's critical. And so I don't think we need to belabor the point.
That point. And then here's the actual tool that's available. I just totally cut off all of that.
No. And we also have an online checker that you can put them into and see. So even if you yourself are not using campaign credentials, other organizations that are, you can see the content credentials on it as well. So again, this is really us, while we're talking about the Microsoft use of it, this is industry standards, and we're hoping people adopt this so that more and more it's just becoming part of our information literacy, that we're checking that these sorts of content credentials are on images, and you can easily and quickly know that it's accurate.
What I sort of picture as the future, and I hope the future is 2 years, not 10, is that when you go online, whatever your preferred social media platform is, and you see a picture, you don't have to guess if it was real or when it was taken. So let's take the political context out of it. After every natural disaster, there are pictures that circulate on the web that claim to be from that natural disaster. And some of them are funny, like the shark swimming through the streets, right? Like there's always that video. And then some of them are less funny, where it's, people who have died, and maybe we're talking about conflict instead of just natural disasters. Like these things happen routinely over and over again. We see a future, and again, hopefully in the short term, because the technology is there, where when you see an image, you can ask questions of it by looking at that little icon and getting more information. What will happen is those who are trying to deceive you, who aren't using these tools appropriately, you can tell. And so that goes to the literacy piece, where you'll start expecting to see more information about that image. And if you don't, you will immediately question it and be skeptical of it. Doesn't mean it's not real. It just means you'll apply a little bit more skepticism to it because they're not revealing to you the information about the source of the image. And that's where we should get societally, where we expect that from our social media companies, from our governments who are putting out real information, right? This is where this is going to be evolving to. So final takeaways. Look, we've gone through all of this. This is how we're thinking about how political organizations can harness AI. Again, I didn't want to make it all doom and gloom. So again, there are really positive use cases for how AI can be used in the political system. Seth right here, why don't you wave for everybody? Seth is our lead on the campaign success team. He works with Democratic campaigns and party committees and others in that ecosystem to talk about a lot of these questions. So if you're interested in actually like, how do I leverage AI to write better emails, that kind of thing, or even more creative ways, Seth and his team are there to help. There are a lot of really good use cases. So we don't want to be all negative about the use of the tech because it's also a really empowering and powerful technology. All right, I think that's kind of it. So now, what do you guys want to talk about? Oh, thanks. All right, right there. Do you want me to give you one of the mics? Yeah, maybe
And please introduce yourself. Tell us how you got here.
Hi, Chris Bastian from New York. This is our third convention, and we always spend the day trying to get a sense of the bigger picture issues rather than just the politics. It sounds very positive, the tools that you're developing to identify the deep fakes. My concern is sort of the retail versus wholesale. So we prospectively have a situation where in the final month, let's say, of the campaign, the deepfake developers will basically just flood the social media environment with not 10 pictures, but 1,000. And my worry is people will stop checking every individual image they have just because they don't have the patience for it, and will sort of revert back to, I can't trust anything.
I agree. So a couple things. Look, there's going to be the big technology companies, I think, are putting the appropriate measures in place to avoid some of the worst case scenarios coming out. But we don't control all of the AI models around the world, right? We recognize there are different models that could be used, open source, nothing against open source, but we recognize that there are just slightly different constraints around those kinds of models. And so we do recognize that some of these kinds of images could still get out. You know, one thing that I've been asked a lot lately is, have you guys been overhyping this problem? Because we're not actually seeing this, right? Like, you know, there are a couple scenarios that have come out, particularly in the last couple of weeks, where we have seen AI either being used or reportedly to be used, and it does seem to be having an impact on the election to a certain extent from a dialogue perspective. But is it actually impacting elections? And to your point, the concern is that we don't want to get sort of claiming victory and getting cocky about it and then have something hit the last 2 weeks of the election. Because the reality is, particularly when you're talking about adversaries, so I'll talk now more about like nation states and how they might try and manipulate our ecosystem. They will, you know, likely wait until the last minute. Some actors are known for doing that, and then flood us with some of those images with 2 weeks to go before the election. So I'm only restating your problem and maybe accelerating it even. But that's why these kinds of conversations are so important, right? That's why it's important for the technology companies to be doing something about this and to doing our best, particularly on the distribution side. It's why LinkedIn has that image verification now, so that you know if something has these standards. We're not going to necessarily be able to help the problem entirely, but I do think that there are some mitigations being put in place, and these conversations are helping to ensure that at least some of the public is aware of it. Oh, of course.
I would also add the mitigation plan that we've spoken about. If you're talking to small campaigns, local campaigns, I think at the federal level in the large campaigns, it's still absolutely a risk. But I think where you might see the biggest damage and where it could actually sway elections are in small campaigns, in local and state elections. So really, we're trying to get the message out there, and I hope the message isn't that it's all positive, because a lot of this is positive, but unless we're adopting the tools, thinking about it, there are real risks here. And so the incident response plan for small campaigns, having campaigns think about this in the same way they thought about cybersecurity, is going to be really, really critical. So, you know, anyone you can send that message to and share that message to is critical.
Thank you so much. My name is Bianca Shaw. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My question, yes. My question is around the policy. So I work in the election administration space, specifically around policy. And so want to hear about proactive policies I know every state is going to be different, but from your standpoint, what type of policies can we begin to speak to our legislators about and community? And I'm asking this because a lot of the times are reacting to what's happening to folks in community, and this is an opportunity to be a bit proactive, especially in Wisconsin. So appreciate any tips.
Absolutely. Man, do I have a white paper for you. So
That's
I would point you towards the great work that our colleagues have done in the government affairs team on the policy side, who have really looked through a lot of the policies that are out there, proposals, I should say, and have specifically called out ones where we think that they could have an impact. One thing that I'll say, though, beyond just pointing to the white paper, is one thing that we found really resonates is when you consider this behavior as fraud. That's something that really resonates with people. We're not talking about freedom of expression here, right? When you're defrauding someone by pretending to be them, that is quite different than a satirical post. And so a lot of what we've been looking at, what we get into in this white paper, is looking at fraud statutes and how we could apply similar fraud statutes in this space in order to have real ramifications for those who violate it. Another angle of that I always think about, and I'm sure you all do as well, is look at the victim and make sure the victim has recourse. So what does it look like for a victim to have recourse in this case? This is where I particularly look at the young women and the things that are happening to them. And like so many of these stories have been, there's nothing they can do about it. You know, they have nowhere they can go. And they're oftentimes, it's being dealt with in the school environment, right? Which is important, and the schools should have policies around it as well. There needs to be like a legal framework for how you respond to this. And I think the fraud statutes is a really good place to look to identify what do we have in existence right now that we can either enhance or empower to give people recourse and to make sure that there's consequences.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Sabrina Otnes. I'm from Washington State. Awesome. So yes, my question is about equitability, because I understand a significant amount of AI models fail because maintaining them is so expensive, and cleaning the data sets, all of that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how do we make AI projects more accessible to everyone and not just companies that have big budgets.
Wasn't expecting that question, but it's a good one. We do think about this a lot. One of the things that our big boss, Brad Smith, says is that when you look at the new economy and as it's evolving around the world, and you look at the likelihood that AI is going to impact it, in which we're living in a new AI economy, is something I've heard said a lot. We can't have that as a whole economy if we're not including everyone, right? It's not going to be for the benefit of the world if we're not looking at people who are otherwise not going to have access to it. So while my answer here may not seem to be what you think it is, we need to look at things like, how do you make sure people in Africa have access to electricity? And how do you make sure people in rural America have broadband connectivity? Because if you're not addressing access to electricity and you're not addressing access to broadband, we can't have the AI conversation. Like how people are included in models is going to be the last thing they're thinking about if they don't have a light switch they can turn on at home, right? So we have very specific projects focused on each of those things, which is how do we expand access to technology as well, but how do we expand access to electricity, to broadband, and then skilling on top of that? How do they behave in the online environment? That's where literacy comes in as well. Once people get access to the internet, how do you make sure they're not just hit with a bunch of crap, and how do they deal with this new environment of new information? So it's all part of a broader question that we're asking about access and I'm not gonna say it right. Yeah, you know what I'm saying, and making sure that it's equal. So it's a great question. I bet someone from our team would have a better answer, but that's how I've heard us thinking about it a lot. Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Gleich, and I am running for United States Senate in Utah to become the youngest woman in the U.S. Senate. Thank you. But I had my first cyberstalker in 2009, back in the days of the forums, and getting that person removed, it was a massive headache. The police told me to change my phone number, to change my social media to private. And for a lot of years, it really silenced me. I didn't speak up about the 2016 election in support of Hillary because I was so afraid of the harassment and the trolls and the bullies online. And it really has a silencing effect on women. It's also been a really big challenge this cycle for fundraising because a lot of people think I'm AI on the phone. So if you could chip in a couple dollars, it would mean the world to me. But I wanted to just read one or two comments that I get on a regular basis. And I think the difference is, I know men get this too, male candidates, but for women, it's so often sexual in nature. And that's the really scary part. So regularly I get this kind of thing. You work better as a hoe than a senator.
Or maybe you can get with, and I apologize, I want to give a warning because these are pretty gnarly. Maybe you can get with Kamala and get instruction on how to suck and F your way to political power in theater. Certainly not your brain's going to get you there. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I get hundreds of these comments. And so my question is, how do we protect free speech while moderating hate speech?
That's such, well, first of all, thank you.
A really short, easy question for you.
We were talking ahead of time, and I appreciate you making a comment because I know as a woman running for office that you are likely already facing this, and so I wasn't surprised to hear that you have experiences. I sadly knew that without actually having to ask you that that was true. And I do appreciate you raising the free speech and expression question because it is really, really important. I recognize it sometimes can be leveraged as a weapon, and that's a different story here. But let's actually think about the importance of freedom of expression and speech, because we don't want to get to a point where we are regulating everything across the internet and not allowing people to express themselves. So how do we deal with that balance? A lot of it, of course, the fraud question we were just mentioning before, that is one that I found resonates really well with people. It is not the same as access to communications or expressing yourself. If you are pretending to be someone else, stealing their likeness and trying to convince other people that they said or did something they didn't do, that is not freedom of expression, that is fraud. And I have found that actually resonates across the aisle. Most people really do appreciate and understand that distinction. Ultimately, it'll come down to policymakers making the distinction in law, right? From a company perspective, we have policies. We state them on our website about what we consider a violation of our policies and the behavior and actions that we'll take if we find that something violates it. But ultimately, when it comes to some of these bigger issues, it's why we are looking to Congress and others, the states, to put some good regulations out there, particularly as it relates to AI-generated speech in this way. So thank you for your work and for your comments. Lauren.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a delegate from Michigan. Allie Dorshevitz from Michigan. And so it's like a comment and a question. So we actually kind of dealt, our dad's a local politician, and his opponent actually did a very similar thing where she edited some of his pictures and like made hit ads like using those edited pictures. And one of the other things that she did was used AI voiceover in some of her ads, and it wasn't like a deep fake, but it was AI voiceover. So I was wondering kind of your thoughts about the use of AI voiceover in like political content, political ads, etc.
Well, first I'll say AI voice manipulation is the most convincing right now out there. And so it's the one that scares us the most when we look at particularly how we think adversaries might leverage this technology to influence people. We obviously saw the Biden New Hampshire robocall. There was an incident in Slovakia where a similar candidate was deepfaked, and it was 2 days before the election. That candidate lost. It was a close election, not suggesting it was because of the deepfake, but it did not help, and it was hard for them to rebut it fast enough. So the audio deepfakes are really problematic. In fact, even voices that you would recognize and think you'd be able to tell the difference, like Tom Cruise, because there is so much material out there of them, and this is the same for political candidates, they actually can create even more convincing deepfakes because there's so much to train on and work on. In fact, there's a scarily good Russian video trying to undermine the Olympic Committee called Olympics Has Fallen that the Russians put out that has Tom Cruise as the narrator throughout. And it sounds quite convincing. So I will acknowledge the challenge of audio deepfakes and say that it is the one area that we are most concerned that we'll see adversarial behavior around. As far as enforcement around advertising and whatnot, that's another area where we're going to defer to the FEC and the FCC to resolve what is sort of the gray area, what is appropriate and not appropriate. I don't want to weigh in on that myself. I'm not as much of an expert on it either. But I will acknowledge the challenge. The audio deepfakes are quite convincing and problematic.
We have one more. The FEC thing is really interesting, and then I'm going to pass it to one of our guests. But the FEC is an organization that can be lobbied pretty effectively on campaign rules. And that's actually a really interesting one, Ginny, that you just raised. Some of you may know there was a big effort to allow campaign funds to pay for childcare that our good friend at Vote Mama managed to get through. So there are ways to get the election law also to catch up with us. And that one definitely feels like an important one to tackle at some
another
point.
example of that is for cybersecurity. Like, we're able to offer certain cybersecurity services for free to political campaigns without them being considered in-kind contributions, because the FEC passed some advisory opinions that enabled it, because they recognize the challenges campaigns were facing with protecting themselves from, nation-state cyber actors. Meanwhile, companies like Microsoft were willing to help, but we were blocked by laws. We couldn't help them unless they were able to pay us a lot of money, which they didn't have, right? So there are ways that the FEC can identify solutions through advisory opinions. So just backing up that comment. Yes, we have a question.
Hi, I like to stand. I'm Nadia Johnson. I'm founder and CEO of one of the leading tech hubs out of the Midwest called Milky Way Tech Hub. We carry out a lot of different community-based programming, especially around digital literacy. And one thing that I'm finding right now is that there's a demand or appetite, not just for digital literacy programs, but digital media literacy programming. And so my first question for you all is, how are you all working with local tech hubs to bring about education awareness to marginalized communities? And in the month of October, we host Wisconsin Tech Month, 100+ events across the entire state. And we rally folks to go to the state capitol to advocate for specific policy that impacts our communities. And I'm curious, do you guys have anything on the website that might support that work or that we could leverage during our advocacy day? Thank you.
Yeah. I would first direct you to our sort of AI literacy hub. We have a whole skilling initiative around AI. There's a number of awesome partners across the US and the globe that we work with. And so there's a whole hub of materials out there. In terms of information literacy, what we've done in our team is partner with a lot of organizations across Microsoft to develop different tools. One of my favorite is Minecraft is the most played video game in the world. And so we have an offshoot called Minecraft Education, which is in schools and can be downloaded. It's often with their licensing agreement, but we find a lot of schools in the US have it, and there are ways to access it for free as well. If you have any difficulty doing that, message me and I can help connect you to your team. And we built a game that's a Minecraft education game called The Investigators, where you're pretending to be a youth journalist and you're investigating 3 different scenarios, and it's a really amazing literacy tool. What's fascinating when we were doing testing is that a lot of young people didn't know what a journalist was, which is very different from when I was in school. They actually had no concept of a school newspaper and journalism. And so there's a lot of really interesting learnings from that experience, but it comes with all educator materials and lesson plans around this content, often with guides that can be used by parents. And frankly, a lot of the times parents learn a lot through these games and these experiences as well, and seeing what's out there. So we have a whole range of different tools, but you can find things like information literacy, and we're working with a lot of community groups on this content and a lot of information literacy and societal resilience experts globally to develop that content as well.
I think we have time for maybe one more. Yeah, here. This is yours, please.
Oh, how exciting that I get to be last. No, oh. My name is Mo Cheeks. I'm with Grow Progress. We're a persuasion company that works with a number of political campaigns and nonprofits and foundations to test their messaging, randomized control test of their messaging. And some of our partners, foundations, work on the issue of trying to inoculate misinformation and disinformation for candidates, specifically, as you described, specifically most predominantly affecting women candidates. I was really encouraged to see the 6 different sort of like standards and ways that you can think about how to identify if a picture or video or something is fake. But I have a specific question about like what happens when, how are you thinking about like how fast all of this is moving? So like it used to, a few months ago, one of the best ways to create a fake video was using Midjourney, and that's like, it's a really complicated process to set up. And now with the Google Pixel announcement the other day, they were saying, we're not really concerned about photographs, we're capturing memories as you recall them. And so they've built into the new Pixel phone, just editing right there. As soon as you're taking your photo, you just start to erase people or add hair or do whatever you want to do to your native photos. It seems to me that we're going from like 10 miles an hour to 10,000 miles an hour really quickly if all consumers will have, our camera phones already have software enhanced pictures, but like suddenly they're all natively editing. I'm just curious, like what did you call it? The way that we can tag a photo as being legitimate or not, authenticated. It seems like a huge percentage of photos will suddenly be edited. What happens then?
It's a really good question. You're right. Everything is moving really quickly. The companies are also, the teams who are doing sort of the responsible AI work I can't, of course, speak to Google, but I'm sure are working in tandem with the actual product teams to ensure that as they go through this process, they're thinking about these challenges. I'd say specifically to the question of as things are edited or enhanced, first of all, editing and enhancing videos and images is not inherently a bad thing. I think what we're really getting at is the transparency part, that transparency thing we were talking about. Like, how do you make it clear that this person wasn't on top of the Eiffel Tower riding an elephant or whatever the enhancement is, right? And if it's just like a filter, do I need to tell my users that, like I added a filter? I don't know that is necessarily the transparency we're talking about. It's the believability and the reliability. And one of the things about the C2PA standard we were talking about, the content integrity, is that it allows for commentary on edits, right? It's not blockchain, but it's blockchain-like in that it contributes to itself and builds on itself with changes. And so you have an original photo and then you touch it up and then you remove a tree and then you add a person. Okay, but the way that this standard is built is that would be logged, that happened. Now, I don't know exactly, I don't want to be careful. I'm not saying how Google is doing their pixel thing, and I'm not sure. They're members of C2PA, but I don't know how they're doing that. But that's the general concept, is that you can log it, record it, make it transparent to people who want to investigate it. Again, it doesn't need to be available to anyone who ever sees that picture, but to a certain extent, if you have that metadata and you're able to make it transparent, particularly if you're a public official or something like that, I think that's where I think this is evolving. But I'm with you on it is moving quickly. Look, the reason we started with the definition of deepfake at the beginning is because deepfake had actually a different definition just a year ago. It really used to mean editing of a video with AI. That's how everyone talked about deepfakes. But now an image is being referred to as a deepfake. And so we have an evolving understanding of this technology, not to mention the mitigations. It will keep changing. That's the only thing I can guarantee.
Thank you so much. I mean, do you want to do one more? So just really quick, first of all, thank you all so much for being here. Did you learn something? I mean, right? Please thank our hosts. I would encourage you to follow All In Together on all the socials. We are a very educational and uplifting space on the socials. And also we've been covering a lot around ongoing discussions, legislation, et cetera, on AI. So there'll be lots of content there that follows up on this conversation. So we would love for you to stay connected to us. We will also be sending out some of the materials that you saw. So those will come to you later in the week in a thank you email. And we're really grateful, and please stick around and chat with each other and chat with us and get some more lunch and take it to your friends. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, Microsoft. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you.